Hello everybody, my name is Sebastian Quiñonez. I'm from Ecuador but currently living in Venice, Italy. I did my bachelor's degree in environmental engineering and now my master's degree in environmental humanities. And here you will see my research based on the Yasuní Biosphere Reserve in Ecuador, focusing on how language can influence public decision making about natural and cultural heritage. And although this case comes from Ecuador, it speaks to challenges shared by many UNESCO sites, like how development pressures, conservation goals, and community participation are affected not only by policies, but also from the stories we tell about nature and culture. To begin, do you think that the language used in governance processes influence whether heritage is protected or exploited? Well, there is an important variable: the source, because the source influences the social identity. The more people identify themselves with a certain group, the more these people adapt the group's values, beliefs and norms, and the more they act to protect the interests of that group. Now, let's start to locate the place and context of this biosphere reserve. The Yasuní National Park is widely cited as potentially the most biodiverse spot on Earth. It's located in a unique area where the Andes meets the Amazon, converging to create a hotspot for biodiversity. For instance, in 1 hectare you can find 673 species, which is more than what you can find in the United States and Canada combined. Moreover, it is also home to indigenous Ecuadorian tribes like the Quichua, the Shuar, the Guarani, and even some indigenous communities that are in a voluntary isolation state. The problem here is that there is extraction of natural resources affecting even cultural heritage, and this has been a threat to biocultural diversity in the Ecuadorian Amazon. This pressure comes from foreign multinationals and also from the proper Ecuadorian government. I will give you briefly a quick context. So the president of Ecuador in 2007, Rafael Correa, asked high-income countries around $3 million in 13 years in exchange to keep the oil on the ground. This proposal failed and extractions began in 2016. Yet indigenous and environmental organizations raised their voice to let Ecuadorians be part of this decision to decide on the future of oil drilling. Finally, in 2023, Ecuadorians were able to vote in this case. The results: nearly 60% of citizens voted yes to keep the oil on the ground, to stop with oil extraction in the Yasuní National Park. However, implementation has been slow because of economic interests and corruption. But how did we get here? In order to answer this, we need to know how has natural and cultural heritage been framed to Ecuadorian citizens. The country's development model since the 70s has been built on the extraction of natural resources. And for instance, in June 1972, Ecuador produced its first barrel of oil. But for this, the government prepared a huge parade, an official parade, to celebrate this first barrel of oil. This event was shown on national TV, and with words of the president of that time, Guillermo Rodríguez Lara, he said, "Petroleum will help us resolve the problems afflicting this country, especially those more pure." His words framed oil as the cure to underdevelopment and put oil as the symbol of national progress. This was a story, the story of modernization through extraction, a story that would define Ecuador for the next 50 years. So we're talking about a narrative of extractivism as a path to prosperity and a patriotic act. Political language shape how citizens perceive heritage and voting choices. So in this case, I decided to use an ecological discourse analysis and applied it to the official televised political debate that happened days before the referendum. In this case, we had two speakers that were examined: one climate activist supporting conservation and one politician defending the continuation of extraction. Using linguistic indicators such as metaphors, framing tools, modalities and abstractions, and also ecological stories analysis through erasure, convictions, or identities, we were able to determine how Yasuni was framed, how it was represented, and also how the act of voting yes for conservation and the act of voting no for extractivism was represented to citizens. In this case, because of time, I passed this methodology briefly, but if you have questions, you can contact me. In the end, I will give you my details and you can contact me for more explanations on methodology if you are interested. For the key findings, we got that the activists omitted clear explanations on how to support the economy without extractive activities, while the politician instead omitted ecological, cultural, and intergenerational consequences of fossil fuels extraction by reframing well-managed minor events as technological deficiency issues or even non-existent cases. Also, the activist goes deeper instead on the collective imagination of a successful ecological future after the referendum, while the politician exaggerates jobs loss, data, and its risk. We also got both speakers positioning themselves as authorities in their own fields, using language to establish credibility and challenge the contrast narrative. In this sense, the activists framed Yasuni as a living heritage, emphasizing life, urgency, intergenerational responsibility, and biodiversity. In the other way, the politician framed Yasuni only as an economic resource, using technical language, abstractions, and fear-based arguments related to security and employment. In the case of identities, citizens were invited to identify themselves either as protectors of life and heritage and an integrity that operated against corruption, or as pragmatic defenders of economic stability, and Ecuadorians as rational actors to ensure national security only. The vocabulary used by speakers can reveal their own ideologies, one that is rich in ecology and one that is dominant in economy and technicism. The proper referendum or the proper political event is framed in two opposite ways. The activist frames it as a decisive moment for an ecological transition, but instead the politician framed the environmental cause as irrational and harmful, and the fact of voting for conservation as being irresponsible. The activist refers to conservation through life and biodiversity and being the ethical choice, while the politician centers exploitation of resources as an act to protect families and future generations. So, what does this mean for biosphere reserve governance? These findings suggest that heritage governance is deeply influenced by how narratives are constructed. Fear-based and technocratic language can undermine trust and long-term conservation. And here we have practical communication tips for biosphere reserves. First of all, name what matters. Explicitly mention ecosystem, species, cultures, and future generations. Also, avoid over-technical language. Leave it for seminars, leave it for the reports, but for the people, no. Make heritage visible and alive. Use emblematic species, landscapes, and communities as protagonists of the story. Frame urgency without fear. Emphasize responsibility and care, but not panic or economic threat. Also, connect identity to stewardship. Invite the citizens to see themselves as protectors and not as obstacles to development. Balance ethics and livelihoods honestly. Address economic concerns without sacrificing the ecological and cultural integrity. And remember that words guide action. Language shapes trust, legitimacy, and long-term commitment to conservation. As final takeaways, I can tell that this Yasuni case shows that protecting natural and cultural heritage is not only a legal or technical challenge. For biosphere reserves and UNESCO designated sites, investing in inclusive, ecological, and cultural grounded language practices is essential for long-term protection. And heritage, you can see, is not protected only by laws, but also by the stories we tell about it. Thank you very much.